Blue Origin releases a new launchpad render that looks oddly familiar to other rocket launch sites. Rocket Lab also releases new launchpad renders, but its Neutron rocket may take a bit longer. Stoke Space assembles a Nova second stage for the first time, and Spain just got its first total solar eclipse in more than a century. All that and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. This week, Blue Origin finally unveiled a rendered image of what New Glenn 9x4's launchpad will look like, and it's familiar. The rocket's launchpad will be located to the north of Launch Complex 36, sharing the launch site with the pad for the smaller New Glenn 7x2 rocket. If this is the first time you're hearing about 9x4 or 7x2, just so you can understand this, the 7x2 variant of New Glenn is the one that's flown 3 times already, with an additional explosion on the pad a few months ago. It has 7 BE-4 engines on the first stage and 2 BE-3U engines on the second stage, hence 7x2. So by that same rule, New Glenn 9x4 has 9 BE-4 engines on the first stage and 4 BE-3U engines on the second stage. This rocket will have much more performance than 7x2 and will be able to carry more tonnage to orbit. The fact that 7x2's pad and 9x4's pad are being called LC-36A and 36B respectively is not new, nor are their locations. But the render does show an interesting change in Blue's operations. It's no secret that Blue has been wanting to ramp up New Glenn's cadence and has been trying it with 7x2 without success so far. Following the on-pad explosion last May, Blue has been trying to return back to flight as soon as possible, targeting the end of this year for that return. The company has been continuously repairing LC-36A while putting together new hardware to optimize 7x2's launch operations and thus accelerating its launch pace. Part of these new operations entails vertically stacking the rocket on the pad with a mobile crane instead of using a transporter erector like they were doing until recently. While the pad still has some time to go until it's ready for those operations, Blue has started to practice them with a New Glenn Stage 2 simulator and a fairing simulator. These operations are being carried out at the old site of Launch Complex 11 and will allow teams to simulate what it would take to conduct these operations with the real hardware once the pad is ready to go. So LC-36A gets a new set of operations and hardware to enable faster cadence, and LC-36B gets, well, if the render is correct, this setup looks quite a bit like Starship's Pad 2 at Starbase, a design that SpaceX is now copying on every other Starship launch pad between Texas and Florida. Now, it's probably not very surprising that a company that wants a fast launch cadence decided to make use of similar properties from another pad built by another company, also designed to support a fast launch cadence. We can see it has its own elevated launch mount, a big flame trench, and diverter, albeit with only one side instead of 2 like Starship's pad. The tower also looks oddly familiar, and yet much different than what the tower at LC-36A will look like once it's rebuilt. It seems like LC-36B's tower will sport a pair of stacking arms similar to the launch tower arms at the different Starship launch towers. Blue's even building their own version of what could be a megabay or gigabay for Starship, but instead for New Glenn, and they're calling it the Vertical Integration Facility. It's another one of those projects that we kinda knew about beforehand from paperwork, but this is the first time we're getting a render of it. And to be clear, construction of this building is well underway, with quite a lot of steel already going up as we speak, so it's no longer just a render. The building is located to the north of the skid strip inside the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and within a reasonable distance from LC-36. Blue is also planning to build its own payload processing facility a bit further south, allowing for the integration of payloads with their fairings much closer to the pad, which, once again, goes back to improving the launch cadence. That said, it's still not fully understood how the complete concept of operations will work with New Glenn 9x4 between the payload processing facility, the vertical integration facility, and the chopstick-looking arms on the tower at LC-36B. It's clear that these arms are not for catching, and while there are many technical reasons such as the tower being oriented the wrong way for a catch, there's still the little detail about the 9x4 booster having landing legs, which it might not need if it were to be caught on those arms. It's been discussed many times that rocket designs seem to be evolving into either Falcon 9s or Starships, be it from American companies or international companies, but now Blue may be setting a trend here of launch pad design also evolving into Starship launch pads. Next, you may remember a couple of weeks ago that we covered a rumor in the space community that Rocket Lab might have been expanding into Australia. Well, that turned out not to be the case, which we cleared up on the show, but this week the company announced that it has opened a new international outpost, just not the one that we might have been expecting. Say hello to Rocket Lab Germany. The company was formally established this week in Munich and builds on ground that Rocket Lab already had in Europe from last year's acquisition of Mynaric. This Munich-based company produces laser optical communications terminals for satellites and will now continue to build them under the Rocket Lab banner. Rocket Lab CEO Sir Peter Beck noted that, quote, Europe faces glaring gaps across both launch and spacecraft manufacturing, and says the new company will address this, combining opportunities for high-frequency access to space and high-volume satellite production to deploy resilient constellations on rapid timelines. Rocket Lab Germany is aiming to build a regional hub that can serve its European customers directly, manufacturing satellites, payloads, and components in Germany. As the company lays new roots in Europe, Rocket Lab also showed off how it plans to launch from just about anywhere on Earth this week. It's called GHOST, or Global Hypersonic and Orbital Spaceport Technology, and it's exactly what it sounds like. A launch site that you can ship in a box. GHOST packs complete rockets, ground support equipment, and range control systems into standard shipping containers. This means that the company could set up a working launch pad for rapid deployment of Electron or its HASTE variant almost anywhere in the world. The service is aimed squarely at defense and national security customers who need to launch fast from wherever a mission requires it. Having a mobile launch site would also open up new orbital trajectories and allow the company to offer sovereign launch capabilities to partner nations. GHOST's first home will be a brand new Launch Complex 4 at the Pacific Spaceport Complex in Kodiak, Alaska, one of 2 new pads planned there. And it's not the first time that containerized pad idea has been explored. ABL tried a launch pad in a box called GS0 back in 2022 from this very same spaceport. After a series of setbacks, the company walked away from commercial launches and redeveloped its container system idea for defense work. Astra also launched its Rocket 3 from Kodiak and Cape Canaveral using a shippable launch pad, and they've got similar plans for Rocket 4, if it ever gets off the ground. Scottish launch provider Skyrora also tried a containerized mobile spaceport that same year, which it shipped to Iceland for the unsuccessful maiden flight of its Skylark L. Skyrora has since parked the idea, shifting focus to a fixed pad at the Saxavord spaceport in Shetland. With existing pads in New Zealand and Virginia, Alaska would bring Rocket Lab's total launch site count to 6. The GHOST system is set to debut with a suborbital launch from Alaska sometime in 2027. Meanwhile, Rocket Lab was awarded a $397 million contract by the U.S. Space Force last week to build, launch, and operate a series of satellites from its own secure facilities. Based on the company's stackable flatelites, the satellites would launch on Neutron and continuously track airborne threats from orbit. This was their second award in just over a week, following a $266 million missile defense deal from the Space Force in late July for suborbital launches. And speaking of Neutron, the company has now logged over 400 hot fires of its Archimedes engine, which will power Neutron at the Stennis Test Center. With control and durability now confirmed after multiple restarts, this week the company announced that the full 9-engine set for Neutron's maiden launch is officially in production. Once they complete their qualification and acceptance testing, they'll be shipped to Launch Complex 3 at Wallops for integration. It's been a while since we've heard some Neutron updates, and this week's earnings call for investors gave us some additional insight on progress. Every part of the vehicle has seen significant testing now, as it moves into the final checkout and assembly stages before being integrated at the pad. Stage 1 is in the final assembly phase, while the interstage has completed its load testing campaign and is also moving to assembly. The second stage is undergoing final fluids and avionics integration, and this week's update said that the stage will soon be shipped. But you might also remember that this stage was said to be shipping soon on a previous earnings call. It does look closer to actually being shipped now, and when it does, the upper stage will be the first section to arrive in Virginia. Rocket Lab plans to de-risk some of the preparations by running end-to-end performance tests on the launch pad before adding the Archimedes vacuum engine. Next to arrive at LC3 will be the thrust module, which is currently undergoing final fluids and avionics integration. This module is the physical interface between the vehicle and the pad, so more tests will be conducted while it's at the pad and before it's integrated with the first stage. This, again, de-risks against potential issues when the rest of the hardware arrives later. Final checkouts are also underway for the reusable Hungry Hippo fairing, and Rocket Lab says the vehicle is on track for delivery to the pad in Q4 of this year. Sir Peter Beck noted on the call that the company's focus is on making sure that when Neutron enters service, it does so as a system that's ready for full-scale production and high-cadence launch. And it will need to be. Neutron already has plenty of launches on the manifest, and not only missions for the U.S. Space Force and the National Security Space Launch Program. Flights are also booked for 7 undisclosed commercial customers, plus a dedicated launch for Kepler Communications. This will be the first time that the company has booked the entire rocket rather than a rideshare. We'll keep a close eye on hardware as it moves to Wallops in the near future. And if you want to follow along, be sure that you've clicked the subscribe and notifications buttons below this video. Give us a like too if you want the algorithm to show you even more content just like this. This week, the moon blocked out the sun for a total solar eclipse, which was actually the first in a rare series of eclipses. We covered the event live from inside the Path of Totality.
Solar eclipses are not rare. What is actually rare is for them to occur multiple times in a very short amount of time around the same place. And here in Spain, we're going to have 3 back-to-back-to-back eclipses. 2 of them total eclipses and 1 will be an annular eclipse. We are on the first of those 3 eclipses here in León in the northern Spain region, so hopefully it's going to be amazing and looking forward to it.
And it certainly was amazing. With no clouds in the sky, we got just about a good a view as we could have hoped for. Nearly an hour after the moon took its first bite out of the sun, it completely blocked our home star from view during the phase of an eclipse known as totality. It may have only lasted 1 minute and 44 seconds, but it was nothing short of spectacular. With the brightest light in the sky obscured, we could see things that we normally aren't able to see, most notably the solar corona, the outermost layer of the star's atmosphere. During the eclipse, the corona appeared somewhat asymmetrical due to a coronal hole. Not an actual hole, but a dim region in which the plasma is slightly cooler. But the eclipse didn't just provide some breathtaking views for us to marvel at, scientists are also interested in this rare view of the corona. Studying the corona helps us to better understand and forecast space weather that can affect the orbits of our spacecraft, just like it did for NASA's SWIFT mission, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. The eclipse also gave us a view of something else that we normally can't see. Solar prominences, which are filament-like structures where plasma comes out of the sun following the magnetic field lines. Before too long, the moon moved out of the way again, and the eclipse was over. But fortunately, we don't have to wait too long, as there will be another total eclipse in about a year, and once again, Spain will get a front row seat. Then there's a third eclipse also crossing Spain in January of 2028. That last one will be an annular eclipse though, as the moon will be just a bit too far away to completely cover the sun. Although solar eclipses can occur anywhere on Earth, things line up just right for these 3 eclipses to be visible from the Iberian Peninsula in quick succession. And we certainly aren't complaining about this cosmic coincidence. From one eclipse to another, this week we got some news about Firefly's upcoming rocket called Eclipse. This medium-lift rocket will be able to deliver over 16 metric tons to low Earth orbit, and its first stage is designed for reusability, optimized for return-to-launch site landings. It's still on track for its first launch next year, although the first booster landings may have to wait for a few flights. The first stage will be powered by 7 kerosene-fueled engines, which Firefly has named Miranda. This week the company announced that it had fired one of the Miranda engines at full power for 226 seconds. The long, nearly 4-minute test fire stretched beyond the duration needed for a regular flight. During the test, the engine performed sweeps of changing power ratios and mixture ratios between the kerosene, or RP1 fuel, and liquid oxygen. With more than 150 hot fires now complete, Firefly believes Miranda's performance is where it should be for launch, so they'll soon move into qualification testing. But wait, there's more. Firefly hasn't been sitting still with its current rocket either. This week they showed off a new look for the smallsat launcher Alpha. The carbon fiber rocket featured a black exterior, but its Block 2 version will introduce a new white finish, and it's not just a visual change, it actually serves a purpose. The white exterior is part of an upgrade to the rocket's thermal protection. One reason for this change may have been the anomaly on Alpha's 6th flight. The mission failed after one side of the first stage got much hotter than it was supposed to, reducing the structural margins, which eventually led to an explosion at stage separation. So it seems that a bit more thermal protection might not hurt. Additionally, Block 2 will also be slightly taller, as its stretched tanks add over 2 meters, or about 7 feet, to the rocket's length. The extra propellant will add a nice performance boost. These and numerous other upgrades will debut on Alpha's next flight, the first Block 2 mission. The mission's currently set for the 4th quarter of this year, with one more mission set to lift off that same quarter. There will be many more Alpha flights in the year beyond, as Lockheed Martin has secured up to 25 Alpha launches. The agreement, first signed in 2024, committed the company to buying 15 launches on Alpha through 2029, with an option to add 10 more. And this week, Firefly announced a 2-year extension to the contract, now lasting until 2031. And now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting with an update on a rescue mission that needed a rescue of its own. A couple of weeks ago, we reported on NASA's mission to boost the orbit of a space telescope, encountering a problem shortly after launch. So let's quickly recap. The Neil Gehrels Swift Observatory has been in orbit for over 20 years, and it looks for gamma-ray bursts that signal some of the most powerful explosions in the universe. Things like the collapse of massive stars or 2 neutron stars colliding. The telescope's orbit has been decaying sooner than expected due to increased solar activity, adding more atmospheric drag. NASA enlisted Catalyst Space Technologies to build a small servicing spacecraft called Link, which would rendezvous with Swift, grapple it, and boost it into a higher, safer orbit. This could add another decade to its life, but it needs to happen before the telescope begins to re-enter sometime this fall. However, not long after Link launched in July, it lost control. 2 of its 3 reaction wheels failed, sending the craft into an uncontrolled spin at 9 degrees per second. This also made communicating with it difficult, and that's where we left the story. But thankfully, there is some good news. Engineers have now slowed that spin using Link's own electric propulsion thrusters to 1.5 degrees per second, and they've successfully uploaded new flight software that gives it stable control using whatever is still working. Link is now cleared to resume its approach towards Swift, with a rendezvous currently targeting late August. The clock's still ticking, though. Swift is currently orbiting around 347 kilometers in altitude, and rescuing it gets a lot harder below 300. The coming weeks will show whether this rescue mission can give Swift that second wind before it runs out of altitude or time. Now, we've already covered some upcoming rockets in this episode, but there are even more to talk about, as Relativity Space provided another update on its partially reusable Terran R. Down at NASA's Stennis Test Center, the rocket's second stage just passed its cryoproof testing. The stage was pressurized with super cold propellants rather than with water on previous tests. To conduct this testing, hold-down clamps were installed on the A2 test stand, and the liquid natural gas system, which is mostly methane, was activated. The process also included a proof test of its composite overwrap pressure vessels, or COPVs. These are the tanks that pressurize the propellant lines during flight. Right next door, the Eon V engine, which will power that second stage, wrapped up its own acceptance testing, which means every engine needed for Terran R's first flight has now completed testing. The Eon R engines are now being prepared for installation. Back in Long Beach, California, the first stage just finished its own structural qualification campaign on a test stand nicknamed the Tender Loving Crusher. The stage survived over 400 pressure cycles and axial loads, reaching 4.3 million pounds of force while pressurized. This validates that the stage can withstand the demanding loads experienced during launch and flight. With hardware for Flight 1 well underway, work has already begun on a tank and engines for Terran R's second flight. Over at the Cape, construction on the pad at Launch Complex 16 continues at pace. The integration building is now powered up, and the overhead crane that'll help stack the rocket just passed its first load test. While Terran R nears readiness, the U.S. Space Force added Relativity Space into its Phase 3 Lane 1 National Security Launch Program last month. This allows the company to compete for high-priority national security missions in the future, and shows a high level of confidence in the rocket before it's even flown. Another vehicle we've been carefully following is Stoke Space's reusable Nova rocket. The company has been a little quiet since the completion of Stage 1 proto-qualification in June, but they did give us a visual update this week. Stoke's medium-lift Nova is designed to be completely reusable. That's both stages, not just the booster. The upper stage features a regeneratively cooled heat shield with its Andromeda engine built directly into it as a ring of small thrusters. Like the booster, this stage will also re-enter and land for reuse. This week, the company shared photos of the payload module, the second stage, and its Andromeda engine mated together for the first time at Stoke's factory in Kent, Washington. This fit check is another significant milestone as the major pieces for Nova come together. The maiden flight is targeted for late this year, lifting off from historic Launch Complex 14 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. And now it's time for your space traffic report provided by Next Spaceflight. It's not every day that we see a rocket failure, but when they do happen, they really put on a show. But before we go to that, a quick look at the successful launches of the week. We've had 3 Starlink launches since our last episode, with 77 Starlink satellites sent up into orbit. From Japan, we had the successful return to flight of the H3 rocket in the 2SRB 2-engine configuration for the first stage. The launch carried the Michibiki 7 satellite for Japan's Quasi-Zenith Satellite System, a satellite navigation system aimed at improving and augmenting GPS coverage over Japan. The previous Michibiki satellite flew on the previous launch of the H3 rocket in this configuration and didn't get to orbit because it literally fell off during flight, leading to a launch failure. The cause was later found to be a structural failure of the payload adapter that connects the satellite to the rocket, so when it broke, the front literally fell off. And speaking of the front falling off, let's talk about that launch failure this week. The rocket that failed was a Changzheng 7A, which took off from Wenchang in China, carrying the ChinaSat 4B satellite, a communications satellite. Nearly a minute and a half into flight, the rocket appeared to veer off and exploded. Closer shots of the vehicle show the front bending and breaking away from the rocket, leading to the in-flight failure. It's not clear what exactly triggered this failure, and it may be a while until we find out what happened, but the point of flight, when it happened, is suspiciously close to when the rocket would have been passing through the period of maximum aerodynamic pressure. So, a time in flight where it's most susceptible to aerodynamic forces. It's not the first time that we've seen a rocket breaking apart at that time in flight, and those other breakups looked very similar. But it's also true that some of those breakups occurred for completely different reasons each time. So without more information, this could have really been anything from bad software, an engine failure, or even a big gust of wind going the wrong direction. It is true that in the closer breakup video, you can kinda see what appears to be one of the engines going out right around the time of the breakup. Now if, and this is a big if it were to have been an engine failure of some kind, it may have impacts on other Chinese launchers. The first stage of the Changzheng 7A consists of a central core and 4 liquid-fueled boosters, all of them powered by the YF-100 engine. Several other Changzheng rockets use this very same engine, although in some versions, the engine comes with some modifications based on performance and other factors. Among this list of rockets is also the Changzheng 12, which has a launch on the schedule for next week. So it's possible it wasn't entirely an engine failure, or if it was one, maybe it was just the version of the engine flying on the Changzheng 7A and not the Changzheng 12. Speaking of launches next week, there should also be another one taking place from China with the Changzheng 2C. We were supposed to have had the second flight of Landspace's Juche 3 rocket by now, with a booster recovery attempt included, but it hasn't happened yet. There's not a lot of information about why it was postponed, but it could pop up again in the schedule for next week, so we'll keep a close eye on that. SpaceX also has up to 4 Falcon 9 missions on tap for next week, 2 of them with customer payloads, and the other 2 being Starlink missions. Of the 2 customer missions, one of them will take place from Florida, carrying replacement satellites for Globalstar's second generation of satellites. The other customer mission will be a classified mission for the U.S. Space Force from Vandenberg. Up in space, NASA astronaut Anil Menon and ESA astronaut Sophie Adano will venture outside of the International Space Station to conduct a roughly 6.5-hour spacewalk. During the event, the astronauts will be swapping out an old high-speed data and communications antenna for a new one. This should be Adano's first spacewalk and Menon's second, having carried out his first one earlier this month. And by the way, that spacewalk encountered a small incident towards the end. A carbon dioxide sensor on Menon's suit resulted in an unexpected data reading. Because of it, NASA decided to delay his next spacewalk from last week to next week, hence why we're covering it in this report. It's not great to see issues with these spacesuits as they are quite old. A big enough issue could not only put an astronaut in harm's way, but also leave NASA and its international partners with no way of working outside of the US operating segment of the station. As you can see, all kinds of events can delay things quite easily. So we recommend that you go to nextspaceflight.com or download the Next Spaceflight app on your phone for all of the latest updates. For spaceflight events like this spacewalk, just scroll down on the main page to the events page to find out more. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. I'm Alicia Siegel for NSF, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.